Some great songs tonight. Dwelling in Beulah Land. We haven't sang that one in a long time, I don't think. It's been a while since we've sang that one. And then Nothing is Impossible with God. That's a wonderful chorus. And I Shall Not Be Moved. They told us at Bible college, don't use that as an invitational. Yeah, don't use it. It's a great song. I enjoyed the verses to it. They were short, but boy, they had a lot of meaning to them. If you pay attention to what you're singing, man, those are some good words and good songs. And thank you for choosing those. You know, I like to dive into different things in the Bible, and sometimes there's not a lot of details given in the Bible about certain events or certain things that are happening. And I don't know if you like to do it, but I kind of like to imagine and try to figure out, you know, some of the details about it, especially on building, because I have a construction mind and things like that. And I saw this week somebody explained, and I found out what kind of lights Noah used on the ark. Does anybody know what kind of lights he used on the ark? He used floodlights. I'll be here all night. No. You're like, I won't be, I'm leaving. I thought that was a really good one. Use floodlights. Well, I was also told in Bible college not to tell too many jokes from the pulpit. But anyways, I thought that was a pretty good one. Mark chapter number 5. We'll get back into studying Jesus' ministry while He was here on the earth and what He did in working these many miracles and touching people's lives. And just so many things going on in this book. From just the first 5 chapters, we've seen so many things happen. And it just seems like Jesus has got this fast pace going, just consistently moving and going from place to place, healing people, touching people's lives, changing their lives. We looked the other week at the maniac of Gadara across the Sea of Galilee and how his whole life was completely changed. And he began sitting at Jesus' feet, calm, cool, collected, and wanting to walk with Jesus and spend time with Him. And Jesus says, no, you're going to stay here, and I'm going back across the sea, and you stay here and witness about what happened in your life. And what a great command for Him to do, and a challenge. And we're going to see more about Him later on in the book. And then last week we saw as Jesus crossed back over the Sea of Galilee, He was met by a crowd of people there in verse 21 down through verse 24. But one particular person stood out in that crowd, and that was Jairus, and he was the ruler of the synagogue. He came to Jesus because his daughter was deathly ill, and they weren't able to heal her. There was no relief for her, and so he came to Jesus knowing that Jesus could heal her, and having that faith that Jesus would heal her, he came to Him. And so we were in that scene. We went through that account last week, and we looked at how Jesus brought her back to life. We saw where in verse 35, one of the men came to Him and said, don't trouble the Master any further, she's dead. And then Jesus said, well, she's not dead, she's just sleeping. And I did some more looking. I remember last week I didn't hit very much on that subject, whether or not she was dead or not, because Jesus said she was sleeping. But there's been just some of the conversations through the week and everyone talking. I went and did some more digging into it, and I went over to the book of Luke, and Luke was a physician, and so we see it from his perspective and what he gives us. And when he talks about it, he brought up some wording that I thought was interesting, and I thought I would bring it to you. In Luke chapter 8 and down in verse 54, Luke said, and he put them all out. That was Jesus. Remember, he put all those people that were scorning him and laughing at him because he said she's just asleep. He put them all out and took her by the hand and cried, saying, Maid, arise. And verse 54 says, and her spirit came again. And she arose straightway, and he commanded to give her meat. And I thought that was interesting because we had some conversations and different people were talking about that this week. And I just heard that, and I was reading through there, and I caught that phrase, and her spirit returned again. And so we see that she actually was dead, and Jesus brought her back to life. But I thought it was interesting because Jesus refers to it as sleep. And we see death one way, but God sees it a different way. Isn't that amazing? We see it as the end of something. That's what they saw it when that man said that she's dead. Don't bother troubling the master. It's all over. There's nothing else we can do. But God doesn't look at it that way. There's more to it. Amen. There's more to it than just being dead. It's over. It's done. But when God's in control, things change, and He sees it in a different viewpoint. And I thought, wow, maybe I should change the way I look at death the same way and look at it as just being asleep and moving on. And we have to get our minds kind of changed around a little bit. And so we looked at Jairus' daughter last week. And what a great, wonderful miracle that took place. And we saw the power Jesus has over death in that passage. And I want to keep our minds kind of on that scene and going back to it, because tonight in verse 25 down through verse 34, we're still a part of that whole scene going on. So let's go back to verse 21 and read down through there so we can get our minds focused back on what was going on. As we go down through from verse 21, and when Jesus was passed over again by ship onto the other side, much people gathered unto Him, and He was nigh unto the sea. And behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and when he saw Him, he fell at His feet, and besought Him greatly, saying, My little daughter lieth at the point of death. I pray Thee, come and lay Thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. And Jesus went with him, and much people followed Him and throned Him. Now, if you remember, that word throne means to just crowd around Him, to the point, I believe, that it was difficult for Jesus really to walk and move. I don't like bringing movies into messages, but it really gives a good example. I was watching a Jerry Lewis movie, and many of you have watched Jerry Lewis, and pretty funny comedian. And in one of his movies, he's going into this hotel, and he has an entourage around him. And he walks up to the counter to sign in at the hotel, and everybody crowds him and just shoves him up against the counter. And then he finally yells at him, and they back all off, and his hat's all messed up, and his jacket's twisted, and all this, and the sign-in card's all crumbled up, and they throned him. They got so tight around, he couldn't move, it messed up things. And I kind of envision that's what these people were doing with Jesus. As He's walking through the town, or as He was going to Jairus' house, these people were so crowded around Him that it was difficult for Jesus to move. He's walking through, and they're following so closely with Him. And that's the scene that we need to keep in our minds as we're going along. Now, as we see this, and as this is taking place, verse 25 begins to change over a little bit on what's taking place. In fact, in my Bible, I have these little marks. It's like a backwards P, which indicates a paragraph shift or a change in the story or structure as it goes along. And so this is like a little insert into this event as Jesus walks along. And sometimes I wonder, because we read quite often in the Gospels that Jesus is going and there's a crowd of people, but we don't get any details about what happens as they're moving along. And I'm wondering if this is just one time out of many that something like this happened. An event took place while Jesus was going from point A to point B. Now remember, Jairus is here. He's with Jesus. He's walking along. No doubt he wants Jesus to move along quickly and to get there as fast as he can, because we, a lot of times, and I look at that and try to apply what I'm reading to my own life, we like to put God in our time schedule and our plans and say, come on, God, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. We got to get this done. We want to move along. We want this to happen. We want this to happen. We got to have this happen. But maybe it's not God's plan and God's timing, and we have to learn patience. I know nobody likes that P word. Nobody likes to say it. Nobody wants to pray for it. Don't worry, I pray that God will give you patience. I'm not afraid to do that for you. And so you will likewise probably do it to me now this week. And thank you so much. But patience, it's a wonderful skill set. Just Saturday, my dad and I were working on the platform and getting some of the trim work done. And I'm not a trim person, because trim work is very detailed, very small. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of patience that I don't have. And you do a lot of work for a little bit of show. I like doing a little bit of work for a lot of show, if you know what I mean. You know, I want to do a little bit of work and they're like, oh, look what I did today. Not you do a whole bunch and you're like, did I even do anything today? It kind of felt like that yesterday, because the floor kind of has some little movement in it because it's not completely flat. And so you'd stick a board up and you'd mark it, and then you go cut it, and then you'd stick the board up and you'd mark it, and you go cut it to get it to fit just right. And I get irritated at that and get very impatient with it. And sometimes I got to put the board down and walk away for a minute because I thought I cut it right and I cut it wrong and I have to start over again. And that's when my patience goes away. And we do that same thing in our own life. We want God to work and everything to go just smooth and fine, and we don't have patience. And I can imagine Jairus was probably getting that way a little bit here with Jesus. If you can, he's human just like we are. And Jesus is going along, and then we get to verse 25. As he's walking along, verse 25, notice the person. In tonight's message, we can just entitle this, A Problem with Blood. A Problem with Blood. Now, that's kind of an interesting title, and I thought it was, but hopefully we'll tie it all together when we get to the end here. But in verse 25, we notice the person involved here. It says, a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years. Now, I think it's interesting that the Bible pulls out that it's a certain person, a certain woman. It was a lady. And we know in Jewish culture at that time, ladies weren't exactly always in the forefront. They were sometimes off to the side. Jesus didn't always ignore them. He was with them. He brought them. We'll see about Mary and Martha in the house, and with Jesus was at Peter's house with his mother-in-law and healed her. So Jesus didn't put them off or anything like that, but sometimes they were not exactly brought into the scene and weren't always up front, in the forefront, and so on. And then we notice the next thing is the problem in verse 25. This last part of verse 25 said she had an issue of blood 12 years. Now Leviticus 15, chapter 15, verse 19 through 31 talks about this issue of blood, discusses that phrase there concerning the law and how that was to be treated. We're not going to go into detail into that tonight, but that's there if you want to go read that later on your own time. But she had this issue of blood. Now, the problem with it is with the judicial law, and the reason I put that in there is so you can get your mind set on what this lady was dealing with. In that law, she wasn't allowed to go to religious services. She wasn't allowed to be, if she went anywhere, touched certain things, all these things, it was considered unclean. So now put yourself in that position, if you can, for 12 years. Everywhere you went, you were in some way, some kind of social outcast, religion. You couldn't go to church. Can you imagine for 12 years you wouldn't be allowed to come to church because of this issue of blood, this problem that's going on? You know, I know all of us have some kind of ailment, something that's bothering us, but how would you feel if that took you to the point you couldn't even come to church? You were not, by the Jewish law, by the Mosaic law, allowed to be even in the church service. You weren't allowed to be around certain people. She was kind of a social outcast. She was cast aside, and that was a problem she had. Not only did she have a problem there, look at the pain involved with it. Verse 26. It says there in verse 26, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse. And if you go over to the book of Luke and look at his descriptions of this event, he said she had spent all her living upon physicians, neither could be healed of any. So the pain involved with this thing was causing her physical pain. It wasn't something that she could get by. No doubt because of the wording Mark used there in verse 26 where he said, and had suffered many things. I don't know if that was a physical suffering of physicians trying to figure out how to deal with this issue and was causing physical pain involved with it. But she was dealing with it. She was dealing with financial problems. All her money was spent. All her living, everything she had was gone. I kind of wonder as I was reading this if this lady had to live in the streets, if she didn't have a place to go, if she didn't have a house anymore, if she didn't have, her family may not have accepted her. I'm reading between the lines there, but my mind kind of wanders into maybe she was in that state in that position to the point where she had nowhere to go and she simply was there living in the streets. The pain that could have been involved with this whole thing, not just physical but emotional pain, and the financial pain, the struggles of trying to get something to eat, simply to survive, to live. And then doing all of this, going on to all the physicians, and no better. In fact, she got worse. And what a depressing position to be in. What a depressing state to be in that place. To think, man, I've spent everything I've had. I've done everything possible. And nothing's getting any better. It's getting worse. How do I get past? How do I deal with this? What's my next step? What's my next thing? And sometimes we get to that point where we've done everything, and there's nothing more we can do. And you just feel like it's over. There's no place left to go. There's nothing left to do. And that's a painful place to be in our minds, in our bodies, and in our soul. And then we notice in verse 27, I have quite a few points. I'm sure y'all got scared when you saw all those points on there. But as we get into verse 27, we see a proclamation made. Verse 27 says, when she heard of Jesus come in the press behind and touched his garment. When she had heard of Jesus. Verse 27. That proclamation, somebody was going through and saying, Jesus is here. Now, she knew about Jesus. She had to have heard about all the miracles, the people that have been healed that we've been reading about throughout the chapter. Maybe she even heard about what happened in the early part of chapter 5 across the sea, where the maniac, the man that was demon-possessed, is now healed in his right mind and is doing well and all those things. She may have heard of that at this point. Nevertheless, she heard of Jesus and knew, He can heal me. That's what her mind went to. And my question came up when I read that is, why didn't she go to Him before? Maybe she had, I don't know, and she couldn't get in. We don't know any backstory to that. But maybe she was thinking, I can't go to Him. I'm not going to go to Him for this. There's no way He's going to heal, and nobody else has been able to heal me. Maybe her faith wasn't at that point. Maybe her desperation wasn't there yet. Maybe she just physically and mentally was not prepared to go to the Master. Maybe the setting wasn't right at that time. Sometimes we use that excuse, it's not the right time. Or, I don't want to do that. That might be embarrassing to me to go to Jesus right now. We get a little prideful because of our human nature. We like to be, we want our pride kind of takes over sometimes. I can handle it. I still have this. This isn't that bad yet. I still got this. Especially when you're young, you think you got everything and you're in control. It's no big deal. I can handle all this. And you have to remember the message this morning about prayer. You need to spend more time praying about it than dealing with it. I'm getting there. I spend more time talking to God about the problem than I do trying to fix it myself. But we see this lady and she hears of Jesus coming in verse 27. Verse 28, there's a plan that develops, and a little bit in the end of verse 27. When she had heard Jesus, she came and pressed behind and touched His garment. But look, that was the action she did. But look at verse 28. She had a plan. For she said, if I may touch but His clothes, I shall be made whole. Now that's some faith right there. Because what we've seen so far, according to what our minds would think as we read through the book of Mark, is when Jesus is dealing with somebody, it's almost like it's a face-to-face interaction. There's probably some touching where Jesus touches them. Or when we see the withered man's hand, He's making a face-to-face interaction with them, looking at them and telling them what to do and doing these things and making them whole. But in this point, she comes up behind Him. She doesn't want to be seen. Now, we don't know why. That may be something in socially she was trying to get in there and get out and be kind of quiet because she didn't want it to be known. I don't know why. Maybe that was their cause for it. But regardless of it, she had the faith to say, if I just touch His clothes, I can be made whole. And in fact, in another passage, it talks about the hem of His garment down low, which, once again, my mind kind of goes into she was sneaking through the crowd and got kind of low and kind of hid a little bit. And if I could just touch the hem of His garment, the bottom part, the dirty part, the worst part of His clothes, that's enough to make me whole. That's how much power God has, how much power Jesus has here. That's what her plan was. That's what her thought was. We go to Jesus and we're looking for some miraculous, huge event to take place in our life and God to work in some special way, and we want to see this amazing thing take place, and sometimes it just needs to be a small little thing. Put our faith and trust in God. And we remember from last week, as later on Jesus will mention it to Jairus there in verse 36, be not afraid, only believe. Amen. This lady had that point. She got past all the social things, all the things that were holding her back from putting her faith and trust in God, and saying, I'm going to go to Him, because she was desperate at this point, and we really shouldn't get there, but that's the last option. But I know He can heal me. I know He can. She had that faith in her that He would do it and be able to. Look at verse 29. We see the physic that takes place, or the healing. I worked really hard at getting all P's on this one, by the way, okay? All of them are going to be P. I worked really hard to get this. I don't know why. I just decided to do it this time, and it worked. But we see this as she gets here, the healing that takes place, the physic. In verse 29, it says, and straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. Straightway, immediately. It wasn't a week later. It wasn't 5 minutes. It was an immediate action, an immediate change in her life. Isn't that amazing? Amen. As we read through the book of Mark, we see that continually. The maniac of Gadara, that was an immediate thing. Jesus told those demons, get out, go in the swine, and it happened right then. It wasn't 5 minutes later, it wasn't an hour later, it happened right then. Many of us, we deal with ailments that may have been bothering us for a while, and they take a long time to heal. I hurt my elbow it feels like a few weeks, it was a few months ago, and it's been bothering me and bothering me and bothering me. It's just now getting better where it doesn't hurt me as much as it has been, and I wanted it to heal immediately. I'm kind of like, I want it right now. And I prayed and I asked the Lord, I said, if you don't mind, fixing this, I'd appreciate it, and He didn't see that I needed to have it fixed just yet. So it took a little longer, but with her, it was an immediate thing right then. Can you imagine 12 years of dealing with this problem, this issue, all the social problems, all the religion? You can't go to church, you can't do all this, you can't do this, you have to stay away from here. People are casting you out, they're not allowing you to be in certain places, and then it's gone like that. Immediately, it's over with. It's changed. That plague is gone from her body. Wow, what an amazing thing to read as we go down through here. Straightway, verse 29, the healing that took place, it was an immediate thing. Not only was it immediate for her that her healing took place, look at verse number 30. Now we see the power of Jesus here, verse 30. It says, in Jesus, what's the next word there? What's that next word? And Jesus, immediately, right then, the same time, as she knew she was healed, Jesus knew in Himself that virtue had gone out of Him. Now I had to look up that and kind of dig into it, but that had the idea of the power of healing that Jesus had went out of Him. He knew it. He knew it took place. It wasn't something that was hidden. It wasn't something that was secret. He knew immediately that she was healed. He knew she touched Him. He knew everything that took place immediately, right then. That power that Jesus has, we see it here. And as it went out, it says in verse 30, turned Him about in the press and said, who touched my clothes? I love this part. I don't know why I just love it. Verse 30, the end of verse 30, we begin to see the perplexed. I worked really hard at getting these P's in here. The perplexed. Jesus asked the question, who touched my clothes? But look at the phrase before that. After the virtue was gone out of Him, immediately that power left Him. He turned Him about in the press. These people were pushing on Him and touching Him, no doubt, rubbing up against Him. All these things are going on. There's probably some kids involved with it. We don't know. I'm just going to throw some, if you give me some theatrical liberties here. And they're pressing on Him, and He says, who touched me? And look at the disciples' response. This is the perplexing part, verse 31. And the disciples said unto Him, thou seest the multitude throning thee, and sayest thou, who touched me? Lord, what do you mean, who touched you? Do you see all the people around you? And you're asking who touched you? Everybody's touched you right now. I don't know why you're asking us why did you ask this question? They were very perplexed by it. A little bit of smart Alex too, if you know. When you read, I don't know if I would talk to the Lord that way. But I was reading that. I don't know why. I just thought of that. When you read that verse, seest thou the multitude thrown in there? It's kind of being a little bit smarty. And touched you. Why are you asking who touched you? They were perplexed by this. They didn't understand fully the power that left Jesus and that touched this lady. So she must have been able to sneak in there in such a way that they didn't even notice her. That's kind of interesting why she would do that as we look at that. And then we go on. Not only are they perplexed, we see their perplexion, but then we see the panic in this lady's life. Look at verse 32. And he looked around about to see her that had done this thing. He knew who it was. Jesus turned around and knew who she was. Saw her standing off, and he saw her. And when he looked around and saw her, verse 33 says, but the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. She was afraid. She was afraid to the point she was trembling at what she had done. I don't know why she was. Maybe there was something in her that made her so fearful of how society would look upon her that she did such a thing. Or because she was sneaking around and trying to do this without being noticed and get it all done and just hiding from the whole thing and trying to stay away from. But Jesus saw her. Jesus says, I know who you are. I know what happened. You can't hide. There's no sense in hiding from me. And as you read that, there's so much you see in that, in the character of who Jesus is, and seeing and knowing God. We see some characteristics about God. And number one, you notice, is that He knows what's going on. You know, in our lives, we have the issues, we have the problems, we have all these things going on in our life. God knows about them. He knows what's happening. He's waiting for us to come to Him, bring them to Him. And there's nothing we're going to hide from Him. There's nothing that's secret to Him. He knows about them. And you see that she came and fell down before Him and told Him all the truth. She just confessed the whole thing. You know, this is what's going on in my life, and this is what's happening, and all these things are going on, and I saw you walking through, and I thought, if I could just touch your garment, I could be healed and made whole. And I snuck through the crowd, and I got down where nobody would see me, and I just touched your garment, and I was trying to get away before you saw me because of this reason or that reason. And she's down there telling Jesus all about it, and maybe afraid that He would punish her in some way for doing such an action in secret and hiding. I don't know the cause for it. The Bible doesn't tell us, but she was afraid of repercussions for what she did. We shouldn't be afraid of bringing things to God. You know that? I was reading that and thinking about that, and I was thinking about as a child or as a teenager, you do something or you get in trouble and you're afraid to tell your parents. Mm-hmm. Some of y'all don't remember those days. That's been a few years ago for some of you. But you do something and you get afraid, I don't want to tell my parents because I did something wrong. Or maybe your boss, you did something wrong at work and you're like, I don't want to tell the boss. I'm going to get in trouble if I tell him that. But you know, with God, we can tell Him. You know, He saw it. He already knows. Amen. We might as well go to Him and say, Lord, this is what's going on. What do you want? Well, how are we going to deal with it? What are we going to do? Forgive me for if I did something wrong, if I did this wrong, if I handled this incorrect. We can go to God. Bring it to Him. This lady, she was afraid to do that. She was doing it all in secret and sneaking around. And then we look at Jesus' response, but the promise that's given here in verse 34. And He said unto her, Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace and be whole of thy plague. Jesus healed her. She was done. It was over. That promise that she had, that assurance that she had that she was made whole. What an amazing story and an amazing event. Now, I entitled this sermon, a problem with blood, because as I was reading through there and I was reading through the whole thing about blood, many of you have medical backgrounds and you understand the purpose of blood in the body and how it works and everything. And then we understand blood in the Bible as we go through it and look at it. And I was thinking about what an amazing example of salvation right here. Here's this lady who has an issue of blood. We all had an issue of blood.
Right.
Our blood's bad. We have a sin nature. It's in our blood. It's in our DNA. It's who we are. And the only way that we're going to get healed from that plague, from that curse, from that problem, is through Jesus Christ. Amen. And Him dying on the cross for our sins. And He makes us whole. But we have to come to Him. We have to go to Him and have the faith and put our faith and trust that He will make us whole. What an amazing account. Yes, it's a physical healing, but man, there's a spiritual healing that can take place just like that in our own lives. And I know many of you, if not all, everyone in here, I would trust has experienced that already, where God has healed your body, made you whole in your spirit, and made you one, and you become a child of God. And what an amazing event to read as we go down through here. Now, as we kind of close up this scene and look at it, remember Jairus is standing here watching all this. All this is taking place. Jesus has now healed this lady. And in his mind, he's thinking, oh, He's going to do the same thing to my daughter. And I just want us to kind of go back in our minds and finish this whole scene. I know we talked about it last week, but let's just kind of close off tonight by looking at the last few verses of this chapter and recapping that. As they leave, that scene is taking place. This lady, Jesus has just told her in verse 34, daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace and be whole of thy plague. What does verse 35 say? While he yet spake. He is talking to her. No doubt Jairus is right there close to Jesus. Hearing that, thinking He's going to do the same thing to my daughter, and probably getting a little bit excited. And then the bad news came that we talked about last week, where the man came and she's dead. Don't bother the master. There's nothing he can do for her. And Jesus turns after Jairus sees this, and no doubt knowing Jairus' mind, says to him in verse 36, be not afraid, only believe. Just like this lady did that just came up and was healed. Just believe and it'll be okay. Trust in Jesus. What an amazing account as we go down through there and we look at that. We see Jesus going to the house, and we saw Peter, James, and John going in with Jairus and his wife to the daughter, and she's laying there and she's gone, and Jesus tells her to rise, and she raises up. She's made whole again. She's made alive. And the excitement that must have been in that mother's face, the excitement that Jairus must have had that his daughter was made whole, the amazement that Peter, James, and John had, because they hadn't seen anybody brought back to life yet. That was new. That was something they didn't. Oh yeah, it's easy to see somebody be made whole. We've seen a withered hand made whole. We've seen Jesus cast out demons. But to bring somebody back to life, is that even possible? The questions that they must have had. But He did it, and the amazement that was there as we closed up the chapter last week and looked at it. In verse 43, it said, and He charged them straightly that no man should know it. What an amazing event. What an amazing account. We see the power that Jesus has, and we read this, and we're like, oh wow, look at what Jesus did. And we believe what we're reading, but yet in our own life, in our own day-to-day, today, are we still believing that Jesus can do that? Can God still work in people's lives, physically and spiritually? Do we still trust in Him for those things? Are we trusting in our own merit and our own work and in the physicians of today? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with going to the doctor. Yeah, please go and let the Lord work through those things. They can do amazing things today with technology, but God can do so much more. And putting our faith and trust in Him is the most important thing in our lives. As we read down through there, I can't help but look at that and think of looking to Jesus for everything. Looking to God for everything in our lives. We get so caught up in living in this world, and we get caught up in focusing on the things of this world, and oh, can this world help me? Forget this world. This world can't help us. It's only through Jesus Christ, only through God that we get our help. And He uses us things in the world to help us, sure. But we put our faith and trust in Him, just like they did in here. Having that simple faith and seeing what God can do in our lives. What an amazing account that we read tonight. We see this lady who had this issue of blood for 12 years is healed. We revisit Jairus' daughter and see her as she's brought back to life. What are some amazing thoughts and amazing events? I'm so glad that God gave us His Word and gave us these accounts that we can read them, we can learn about Him. We can grow in our faith by putting our trust in Him after reading these accounts. Amen. Well, let's close in a word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank You for tonight. Thank You for this passage, and as we read through here and we see how these people were healed and brought back to life and all these amazing events, and it baffles our minds from time to time as to how that could even happen. But we know that You created all of this world. You created everyone that's here. You're in control of it all. And we know that You have all the power, and we see that as we read through here. Help us, Lord, to take this and apply it in our minds and our hearts, that we would trust You more, put our faith more in You, and grow closer to You. And we ask these things in Your name. Amen.
Amen.